Commander Zexithera's mandibles clicked nervously as she stared at the holographic display floating before her. The blue light cast eerie shadows across her insectoid features, highlighting the battle scars that crisscrossed her chitinous exoskeleton. Her forearms trembled slightly as she began recording her testimony for the Galactic War Crimes Tribunal. I am Commander Zexithera of the 5th Krillian Fleet, veteran of 37 campaigns across 12 star systems. I have witnessed the fall of civilizations, the burning of worlds, and the screams of a billion dying souls. Yet nothing in my 3 centuries of military service prepared me for what I encountered when humanity joined the galactic stage. She paused, her compound eyes reflecting the horror of memories that would never fade. The recording chamber was silent except for the soft hum of environmental systems, but in her mind, she could still hear the sounds of that first terrible battle. The humans arrived in our galaxy approximately 50 standard years ago. Their ships were crude by our standards, held together with metal alloys and primitive fusion drives. We, the established powers of the Galactic Council, viewed them as we did all emerging species, potential subjects for integration into our civilized order. How catastrophically wrong we were. The first contact had seemed routine. The Krillian Empire, alongside their allies the crystalline Vorthak and the energy-based Nexari, had approached the human homeworld with standard protocols. They offered technology, knowledge, and a place in the galactic community in exchange for submission to council, authority, and the usual tributes of resources and soldiers. The human delegation that met us was led by a female called Admiral Sarah Chen. She was small even by human standards, with graying hair and eyes that seemed to hold starlight. When we presented our terms, she listened politely, asked several questions about our military capabilities, and then delivered the most chilling response I have ever heard. Zexithera's voice cracked as she recalled those words that would echo through galactic history. She said, "Thank you for the information. We decline your offer. We suggest you leave our space immediately, or we will be forced to demonstrate why that would be in your best interest." The audacity was breathtaking. A species that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel was threatening the combined might of 3 galactic powers. The Krillian commander had laughed at the time. Their ships outnumbered the human vessels 1,000 to 1. Their weapons could crack planets, their shields could withstand the fury of stars. What threat could these upstart mammals possibly pose? We began with standard intimidation tactics, a show of force, energy cannons that lit up their star system like a festival of lights. We destroyed several of their outer mining stations, expecting immediate surrender. Instead, we received another transmission from Admiral Chen. She was smiling. That smile haunted Zexithera's dreams. It wasn't the expression of someone afraid or desperate. It was the smile of a predator that had just been given permission to hunt. The human replied, "Thank you for clarifying your intentions. You have now committed acts of war against the United Earth Federation. We are responding accordingly. May whatever gods you worship have mercy on your souls, because we won't." The first wave of human ships that emerged from their planet's shadow defied everything the Krillians understood about warfare. These weren't the clumsy vessels they had observed earlier. Sleek, angular craft moved with impossible precision, their hulls seeming to absorb sensor sweeps rather than reflect them. Our tactical computers couldn't lock onto them properly. They moved like they were alive, like schools of predatory fish rather than mechanical constructs. When they opened fire, we discovered that humans had been studying our first contact for weeks, analyzing every emission from our ships, every weakness in our formation. The human weapons were crude but effective. Instead of elegant energy beams, they used kinetic projectiles, chunks of dense metal accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. Simple, barbaric, and absolutely devastating against shields designed to deflect coherent energy. Their first salvo crippled our command vessel. Not destroyed, crippled. That was when we began to understand that humans don't fight to win quickly. They fight to make their enemies suffer. As Krillian ships began to fall, Zexithera ordered a retreat to the outer system, expecting the humans to celebrate their victory and prepare defenses for the inevitable retaliation. Instead, the human fleet pursued relentlessly. They hunted us, not like civilized warriors seeking to disable enemy forces, but like apex predators running down wounded prey. Every ship that lost power was boarded. Every crew member was taken alive. We thought they wanted prisoners for interrogation. The recordings that reached the Krillian fleet later revealed the truth. The humans weren't taking prisoners. They were taking students. Each captured alien was interrogated not just for military intelligence, but for every detail of their species' biology, psychology, and technology. They were learning us, studying how we think, how we react, how we break, and they were very, very good at it. By the time reinforcements arrived, the human fleet had vanished, leaving behind only the floating wreckage of once proud Krillian warships, and a message burned into the hull of Zexthera's flagship in precise Krillian script. This was a warning. Leave our space or discover what we learned about you. That was my first encounter with humanity's approach to warfare. I believed it was an aberration, a lucky victory against an unprepared enemy. I recommended to High Command that we return with overwhelming force and teach these primitives their place in the cosmic order. Zexthera's mandibles clicked again, a sound of deep regret that resonated through the recording chamber. I was so very catastrophically wrong. That first battle wasn't humanity showing us their strength. It was humanity being merciful. They were giving us a chance to walk away before they showed us what war really meant to a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of killing. The commander's testimony paused as she gathered herself for what would come next. The real horrors were yet to be revealed, and even after all these years, she wasn't sure she was strong enough to speak them aloud. But the galaxy needed to know. The galaxy needed to understand what they had awakened when they threatened humanity's homeworld. What I'm about to tell you may seem impossible, even fantastical. I only ask that you remember I am a decorated military officer with an impeccable record. I have never lied in an official report, and I am not lying now. The humans are not like us. They are something else entirely. Something that should never have been allowed to reach the stars. The Krillian High Command's response to Zexthera's initial report was predictable. 3 full battle fleets, supported by Vorthak crystal ships and Nexari energy constructs, were dispatched to the human system, with orders to bring these upstart mammals to heel. General Korthax, the Krillian Empire's most decorated warrior, commanded the operation personally. I served as Korthax's intelligence officer during what we called the Human Pacification Campaign. The general was a legend among our people. He had conquered 47 worlds and never suffered a significant defeat. His confidence was absolute, his planning meticulous. He viewed the humans as we might view an infestation of tunnel rats, annoying but easily exterminated with sufficient force. The combined fleet that approached Earth's solar system was magnificent to behold. Over 3,000 vessels of various classes, from nimble scouts to massive dreadnoughts capable of reducing continents to molten slag. The firepower arrayed against humanity could have sterilized entire star systems. We expected to find a desperate species hastily preparing inadequate defenses. Instead, we found nothing. The human system appeared completely empty. No ships, no stations, no signs of military preparation. Even their homeworld showed minimal activity. General Korthax was suspicious, but our deep scans confirmed it. The humans had apparently evacuated their entire civilization. The fleet advanced cautiously, expecting traps or hidden weapons. But the solar system remained stubbornly empty as they approached the third planet. Earth hung in space like a blue-green jewel. Beautiful and apparently defenseless, that should have been our first warning. A species doesn't survive to achieve spaceflight by running from fights. But Korthax was eager to claim victory and return to more worthy conquests. He ordered the fleet into standard bombardment formation around the planet. The humans chose that moment to reveal their true nature. The attack didn't come from space. It came from Earth itself. What we had interpreted as evacuation activity was actually the largest military mobilization in galactic history. The humans hadn't fled. They had simply moved their entire war machine underground, underwater, and into hidden facilities we never detected. The first sign something was wrong came when Krillian long-range sensors began failing. Then short-range sensors, then communication arrays. A web of interference was spreading through the fleet, isolating ships from each other and blinding them to external threats. We discovered later that humans had spent decades developing quantum disruption technology, specifically designed to counter our sensor networks. They had studied our first contact transmission so thoroughly that they could predict exactly how our ships would react to signal loss. In the growing electronic darkness, the human attack began. But it wasn't the crude kinetic barrage the Krillians expected. Instead, Earth's surface erupted with thousands of launch signatures as weapons platforms revealed themselves across every continent. The missiles they fired weren't designed to destroy our ships. They were designed to deliver boarding parties. Thousands of small craft, each carrying human soldiers equipped with technologies we had never seen before. These weren't the bulky environmental suits typical of most species. Human soldiers wore form-fitting armor that seemed to enhance rather than encumber their natural abilities. They moved through space like they were born to it, using tiny maneuvering thrusters to navigate the complex three-dimensional battlefield with impossible precision. Our ship's defensive systems were designed to stop large threats. Other warships, massive missiles, energy beams, they were useless against swarms of individual human soldiers who treated the vacuum of space like an ocean they could swim through. The boarding actions that followed shattered every preconception the Krillians held about ground combat. Human soldiers didn't just fight in their ship corridors, they hunted there. They moved through ventilation systems, maintenance shafts, and access tubes that were never designed for combat, turning the familiar environment of Krillian vessels into alien maze worlds where death could strike from any direction. They had studied our ship designs from the wreckage of our first encounter. Every weakness, every blind spot, every structural vulnerability had been cataloged and exploited. They knew our vessels better than we did, but it wasn't just their tactical knowledge that made human soldiers terrifying. It was their complete disregard for their own survival in pursuit of mission objectives. I witnessed a human soldier continue fighting after taking wounds that would have incapacitated any Krillian warrior. When his weapon was destroyed, he used improvised tools. When those failed, he used his own body as a weapon. When he finally fell, it was only after completing his objective of sabotaging our ship's life support systems. The stories that filtered back from other ships were even more disturbing. Humans demonstrated an intimate knowledge of Krillian anatomy, striking with surgical precision at nerve clusters and vulnerable joints. They seemed to understand exactly how much damage they needed to inflict to disable rather than kill their opponents. They were taking prisoners again, but this time we understood why. Every captured Krillian was being subjected to intensive interrogation about our military structure, our homeworlds, our allies. The humans were planning something far beyond this single battle. As the engagement continued, it became clear that the human strategy was unlike anything in galactic military doctrine. They weren't trying to destroy the Krillian fleet. They were trying to capture it intact. Ship after ship fell to boarding actions. Human engineers would seize control of our vessels and turn our own weapons against us. Within hours, General Corthax found himself commanding not 3,000 ships, but perhaps 300, while the humans controlled nearly 1,000 captured Krillian vessels. The psychological impact was devastating. Krillian crews began surrendering without fight, knowing that resistance would only lead to the same inevitable outcome. The humans had somehow turned the galaxy's most advanced military technology against itself. General Corthax finally ordered a full retreat, but the humans had anticipated this as well. They had seeded the system with gravity mines, devices that created localized space-time distortions. Our ships trying to escape found themselves trapped in gravitational wells that prevented faster-than-light travel. The final phase of the battle was perhaps the most terrifying. With escape impossible and their fleet crippled, the remaining Krillian forces expected the humans to demand surrender and negotiate terms like civilized beings. Instead, Admiral Chen's voice echoed across all frequencies with a simple message. You came to our home to murder our families and enslave our children. We are not interested in your surrender. We are interested in making sure you never threaten anyone ever again. What followed wasn't a battle in any traditional sense. It was an extermination carried out with clinical precision. Human forces systematically disabled every remaining Krillian ship, capturing crew members and stripping vessels of everything useful. They took our weapons, our technology, our ships, our people. But more than that, they took our records. Every database, every communication log, every piece of intelligence about the Krillian Empire and its allies. By the time they were finished, the humans knew more about our civilization than many of our own leaders. When it was over, Admiral Chen appeared on the main viewer of Corthax's flagship. She looked older than in their first encounter, wearied by the burden of command but absolutely resolute. She told us that we would be returned to Krillian space with a message for our government. The message was simple. Humanity claimed no territory beyond their own system, but any species that threatened Earth or its colonies would face total annihilation. Not defeat. Annihilation. The few survivors were loaded onto a single ship with enough supplies to reach Krillian space. As they departed, Zexathara looked back at Earth's system and saw something that would haunt her forever. The humans were already putting our captured technology to use. They were retrofitting our ships with their own weapons, creating hybrid vessels that combined the best of both technologies. They weren't just defending themselves, they were preparing for war on a galactic scale. The journey back to Krillian space took weeks, and during that time, the survivors had ample opportunity to analyze what they had experienced. The conclusion was unavoidable and terrifying. The humans hadn't been caught off guard by our attack. They had been expecting it, preparing for it, and using it as a field test for their military capabilities. We hadn't walked into a trap. We had walked into a laboratory where the humans could experiment with techniques for fighting galactic-level conflicts. The return to Krillian space brought no relief for Zexathara and the other survivors. Their reports were met with disbelief, accusations of cowardice, and demands for more detailed intelligence about human capabilities. The Krillian High Command simply could not accept that their most powerful fleet had been not just defeated, but utterly dismantled by a species they considered primitive. Emperor Zixmoth himself summoned me to the Crystal Throne. His rage was terrible to behold. His carapace had turned the deep purple that indicated extreme agitation, and his pheromone glands were releasing stress chemicals that made the entire throne room reek of fear and fury. He demanded to know how 3,000 of our finest vessels could be lost to a pack of hairless mammals. The Emperor's reaction was typical of the Krillian leadership. They had built their empire on the assumption that military might combined with technological superiority made them invincible. The idea that strategy, adaptability, and pure ruthless determination could overcome such advantages was incomprehensible to them. I tried to explain that the humans fought differently than any species we had encountered. They didn't just study our weapons and tactics, they studied us. Our psychology, our social structures, our biological limitations. They understood how we thought and used that knowledge against us. But the Emperor was beyond reason. The loss of such a significant portion of the Krillian fleet had weakened their position relative to other galactic powers. The Vorthak were already making subtle territorial demands, and the Nexari had begun questioning Krillian leadership of their military alliance. Emperor Zixmoth declared that the human threat would be eliminated permanently. He authorized the use of planet-killer weapons, devices that the galactic community had banned centuries ago. The plan was to sterilize not just Earth, but every world the humans had begun to colonize. The decision to deploy world-ending weapons marked a turning point in galactic civilization. For thousands of years, conflicts between species had been limited in scope, following ancient codes of conduct that prevented total annihilation. The humans had somehow driven the Krillians to abandon these fundamental principles. I was assigned to the 4th Grand Fleet under Admiral Vex Taylor. Our orders were explicit. Approach the human colonies and destroy them one by one until Earth itself surrendered unconditionally. We were to leave no human worlds habitable and take no prisoners. The fleet that assembled for this genocide was the largest military force in galactic history, 5,000 Krillian vessels supported by 2,000 Vorthak crystal ships and 1,500 Nexari energy constructs. The combined firepower could have shattered moons and boiled away planetary atmospheres. We approached the human colonies expecting to find desperate refugees and hastily constructed defenses. Instead, we found something that defied all logic and reason. The humans had somehow established defensive positions on worlds they had only colonized within the past few years. The first target was New Geneva, a mining world in a system 40 light-years from Earth. Intelligence reports indicated it housed fewer than 1 million human civilians and had no significant military installations. The plan was to demonstrate overwhelming force by destroying it completely, sending a message that would terrorize other human colonies into surrender. When we dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, we immediately detected massive energy signatures from the planet's surface. Long-range scans revealed installations that shouldn't have been possible. Defensive platforms that would have taken decades to construct and required industrial capabilities far beyond what humans possessed. The mystery deepened. When the fleet's communication officers received a transmission from the planet's surface. The speaker was human, but the technology carrying the signal was clearly of Krillian origin, modified and improved beyond anything the original designers had envisioned. The human identified herself as General Maria Santos, military governor of New Geneva Colony. She informed us that we were trespassing in human space and had exactly one opportunity to withdraw before defensive measures were activated. The audacity was breathtaking. A single colonial world threatening a fleet that could have conquered star systems. Admiral Bex Taylor responded with the traditional Krillian ultimatum: immediate and unconditional surrender or face total annihilation. The humans had 1 hour to evacuate their civilians and prepare for orbital bombardment. General Santos's response is burned into my memory. Thank you for the timeline. 1 hour is more than we need. Please prepare yourselves for a learning experience. The first indication that something was wrong came 30 minutes into the ultimatum period. Fleet sensors began detecting movement in the asteroid field at the system's edge, asteroids that were somehow changing course and accelerating toward the Krillian formation. Our tactical computers identified them as asteroids that had been hollowed out and converted into massive kinetic weapons, but that was impossible. The engineering required to move such massive objects would have taken years and resources far beyond human capabilities. As the asteroid weapons approached, more surprises revealed themselves. The space around New Geneva erupted with hidden weapons platforms that had somehow evaded all previous scans. Defensive satellites that shouldn't have existed began targeting the largest Krillian vessels with weapons that appeared to be hybrid human-Krillian technology. That was when we realized the true scope of human preparation. They hadn't just captured our ships and technology during the Earth battle. They had reverse-engineered everything and improved it. Our own weapons were being used against us, but in configurations that surpassed the original designs. The battle for New Geneva lasted 6 hours and ended in complete disaster for the Galactic Alliance, not because the humans had superior firepower, but because they had turned the very concept of space combat into something unrecognizable. They didn't fight like a colonial militia defending their homes. They fought like they had been planning this specific battle for decades, anticipating every move we would make and preparing counters for strategies we hadn't even considered using. Human ships emerged from hidden positions throughout the system. Vessels that combined captured Krillian hulls with Vorthak crystal arrays and Nexari energy cores. They had somehow integrated technologies from 3 different species into hybrid craft that outperformed anything in the galactic fleet. But the technology wasn't the most terrifying aspect of their defense. It was their tactics. They fought with a coordination and precision that suggested they weren't individual ships at all, but components of a single vast organism. Every human vessel seemed to know exactly where every other human vessel would be at any given moment. They moved in complex patterns that created overlapping fields of fire while avoiding friendly fire incidents that should have been inevitable in such a chaotic environment. Our communications officers finally intercepted human tactical transmissions and discovered something that still gives me nightmares. They weren't using traditional command structures at all. Every human soldier, every ship captain, every defense platform operator was connected through some kind of instantaneous communication network. The humans had somehow solved the faster-than-light communication problem that had plagued galactic civilization for millennia. Their forces could coordinate across light years in real time, sharing information and adjusting tactics at the speed of thought. When Admiral Vexa Taylor ordered a retreat, we discovered that the humans had prepared for that as well. The modified asteroids we had detected earlier weren't weapons platforms. They were gravity generators. The entire system had been turned into a massive trap that prevented faster-than-light travel. Trapped in the system with no escape route, the Galactic Alliance fleet found itself being systematically dismantled by forces that seemed to anticipate every defensive maneuver. Ships that tried to group together for mutual protection found themselves targeted by weapons that could punch through multiple layers of shielding. Vessels that attempted to scatter were hunted down by human craft that pursued them through asteroid fields and debris clouds like predators chasing prey. The final transmission from General Santos came as our flagship's main engines were failing. You came here to commit genocide against our families. We cannot allow you to leave with the knowledge and capability to try again. Your ships and technology will be put to better use defending innocent lives throughout the galaxy. The survivors of the 4th Grand Fleet were processed with the same clinical efficiency the humans had demonstrated at Earth. Crews were separated, interrogated, and subjected to intensive psychological evaluation. But this time, there was a disturbing new element to their captivity. The humans didn't just want to know about our military capabilities. They wanted to understand our motivations, our fears, our social structures. They were studying the psychology of genocide, trying to understand how civilized species could be driven to attempt the complete extermination of other sentient beings. When Zexthara and a handful of other survivors were finally released to carry word back to Krillian space, they carried a message that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. The humans were no longer content to defend the message that the human survivors carried back to Krillian space was not delivered through traditional diplomatic channels. Instead, it arrived as a massive data transmission that bypassed all military encryption and appeared simultaneously on every communication device in the Krillian Empire. The technological implications were staggering. The humans had somehow infiltrated the most secure networks in galactic civilization. The transmission began with Admiral Chen's face appearing on screens across our homeworld. She looked tired, older than when we first encountered her, but her eyes held a resolve that chilled every Krillian who saw her. Her words were simple but carried the weight of absolute authority. The message was brief and devastating in its clarity. Humanity formally declared that any species engaging in genocide, slavery, or the deliberate extermination of sentient life would be considered an enemy of all civilized beings. The humans were appointing themselves as the galaxy's moral arbitrators, and they had the military power to enforce their judgment. She announced that human fleets were already moving to liberate worlds under Krillian occupation, not to conquer them for humanity, but to free them from what the humans called tyrannical oppression. They were declaring war not just on the Krillian Empire, but on the very foundations of our galactic order. The response from Emperor Zixmoth was predictably furious. He declared the humans to be a plague that had to be eradicated before their madness could spread to other species. The remaining Krillian fleets were recalled from frontier territories and ordered to converge on the homeworld for a final, decisive campaign. But the humans had anticipated this reaction as well. Before our fleets could fully assemble, human task forces appeared in a dozen different systems simultaneously. They weren't attacking military targets. They were liberating slave worlds and breaking up forced labor camps. The psychological impact on Krillian society was immediate and devastating. For centuries, the Empire had maintained control through the implicit threat that resistance would bring overwhelming retaliation. Suddenly, that retaliation was being visited upon the oppressors instead of the oppressed. I was present during the emergency session of the High Command when reports began flooding in from across our territory. World after world was being liberated by human forces that seemed to appear from nowhere, strike with surgical precision, and vanish before our response fleets could arrive. The humans had somehow solved the fundamental problem of interstellar warfare, the time delay between intelligence gathering and military response. Their ships moved with a coordination that suggested they weren't limited by the light speed barrier that constrained all other galactic civilizations. Our intelligence officers discovered that the humans had been infiltrating our territory for months, possibly years. They had established hidden bases, recruited local resistance movements, and positioned assets throughout our empire. They knew our defenses better than we did. But the most terrifying revelation came when Krillian forces finally managed to engage a human liberation fleet directly. The battle occurred at Theta Krillos, a mining world where millions of enslaved Forthak were forced to extract rare minerals under horrific conditions. The human fleet that arrived to liberate Theta Krillos consisted of only 50 vessels against our local defense force of nearly 300 ships. By all military logic, they should have been destroyed immediately. Instead, they demonstrated capabilities that redefined our understanding of space combat. The human ships moved through space in ways that violated basic physics as the Krillians understood it. They seemed to phase in and out of normal space-time, appearing behind Krillian vessels that had been tracking them from completely different vectors. Our weapons couldn't maintain target locks. Our sensors couldn't predict their movements. It was like fighting ghosts that could reach out and touch us while remaining completely untouchable themselves. The engagement lasted less than 2 hours, and when it was over, the entire Krillian defense fleet had been either destroyed or captured. The human forces then proceeded to systematically dismantle the planet's oppressive infrastructure with a precision that suggested intimate knowledge of every facility and security system. They didn't just free the slaves, they provided them with captured Krillian equipment, medical care, and transportation to safe worlds. It was the most efficiently executed humanitarian operation in galactic history, carried out by the same species we had dismissed as primitive barbarians. The liberation of Theta Krillos marked the beginning of what historians would later call the human intervention period. Across Krillian space, worlds that had suffered under Imperial rule for generations suddenly found themselves free as human forces appeared to break their chains. But the humans weren't content to simply react to Krillian oppression. They began actively hunting down war criminals, tracking ships involved in slave trading, and dismantling the infrastructure that supported our empire's darker activities. The psychological warfare was perhaps more devastating than the military campaigns. Human intelligence operatives somehow acquired detailed records of every atrocity committed by Krillian forces over the past century. These records were then broadcast throughout galactic civilization, exposing the full scope of Imperial brutality to species that had remained neutral in the conflict. Emperor Zixmoth tried to dismiss these revelations as human propaganda, but the evidence was overwhelming. Ship logs, communication intercepts, video recordings. The humans had documented everything. Our allies began to distance themselves from us, and some openly switched sides. The Vorthak were the first to formally withdraw from the alliance. Their crystalline society valued order and stability above all else, and the humans had demonstrated that the current galactic order was built on foundations of violence and oppression that made long-term stability impossible. The Nexari followed soon after, their energy-based consciousness finding human concepts of individual freedom and self-determination more compatible with their nature than Krillian hierarchical authoritarianism. As the alliance crumbled, human forces began appearing in the core systems of the Krillian Empire itself, not as conquerors but as liberators and investigators. They established temporary bases on worlds where they had broken up slave operations, using captured Krillian technology to provide humanitarian aid and document war crimes. I was assigned to a task force ordered to retake one of these occupied worlds, Krillos Prime, where humans had liberated a massive forced labor complex. Our intelligence suggested they had only a token garrison, maybe 200 human soldiers. The task force that approached Krillos Prime consisted of 600 Krillian vessels, supported by mercenary units from species still loyal to the Empire. It should have been a routine operation to reclaim Imperial territory and capture human prisoners for interrogation. When we arrived in the system, we found something that defied all logic. The humans had somehow constructed a massive orbital platform around the planet, using materials that our scans identified as originating from destroyed Krillian ships. The platform wasn't just a defensive installation, it was a symbol. The humans had taken the wreckage of Krillian military might and transformed it into a beacon of hope for oppressed beings throughout the galaxy. Freed slaves from dozens of species were working alongside human engineers to expand and improve the facility. Admiral Kezathara ordered an immediate assault, expecting to overwhelm the platform with superior numbers. The human response was unlike anything we had encountered before. Instead of fighting back, the human defenders simply stopped resisting. Every human ship powered down its weapons. Every defensive platform went silent, and a single transmission was broadcast on all frequencies. The speaker was a human child, perhaps 10 standard years old by their biological markers. She identified herself as Sarah Chen, apparently the daughter of the Admiral Chen we had first encountered. Her message was brief but devastating in its simplicity. The child explained that the humans had documented every war crime committed by the approaching Krillian fleet. Every slave taken, every world brutalized, every innocent life destroyed. This information had been compiled into a comprehensive database that was being transmitted simultaneously to every civilized world in the galaxy. She told us that we had a choice. We could destroy the human platform and kill the thousands of freed slaves and human volunteers aboard it, adding mass murder to our list of crimes, or we could withdraw and allow the galaxy to judge whether our actions represented civilized behavior. The psychological impact was overwhelming. Krillian soldiers who had followed orders without question for their entire careers suddenly found themselves forced to confront the moral implications of their actions. The platform remained defenseless, its population of freed slaves and human liberators trusting in the fundamental decency of their former oppressors. Admiral Kezithara's order to fire never came. In the silence of space, with the entire galaxy watching, the cream of the Krillian military found themselves unable to commit genocide against defenseless civilians and the humans who had freed them. The Taskit. The failure to retake Krylos Prime marked the beginning of the end for the Krillian Empire as a galactic power. Word of the fleet's withdrawal spread throughout civilized space within days, carried by the same instantaneous communication network that allowed humans to coordinate their far-flung operations. The psychological impact was devastating. If the Empire's finest military forces wouldn't fight to protect Imperial territory, what hope was there for maintaining control over rebellious outer worlds? Emperor Zixmoth's response was to declare martial law throughout Krillian space and begin conscripting civilian populations for military service. He announced that every Krillian citizen would fight to defend their species against human extinction, whether they wanted to or not. The conscription orders revealed the depth of Imperial desperation. Factory workers, farmers, teachers, even children barely old enough to understand military concepts were drafted into hastily organized militia units. The Empire was cannibalizing its own society to feed an increasingly hopeless war effort. I was promoted to admiral and given command of these civilian forces, not because of any military qualifications, but because so many senior officers had either been killed, captured, or had simply refused to continue serving. The Krillian military hierarchy was collapsing from within. The civilian conscripts were equipped with whatever weapons could be hastily manufactured and loaded onto cargo vessels converted for military use. The resulting fleet was massive in numbers but pathetically vulnerable. Untrained civilians and unarmored ships carrying weapons they barely understood. We approached the Proxima sector, where human forces had established a major base on the ruins of what had been our largest slave processing facility. Intelligence reports suggested they had converted the facility into some kind of refugee settlement, housing millions of beings liberated from various Krillian worlds. The plan was to overwhelm the human defenses through sheer numbers, accepting massive casualties to achieve victory through attrition. Emperor Zixmoth had calculated that even humans couldn't kill Krillians faster than the Empire could produce new soldiers. When we dropped out of hyperspace, we found ourselves facing something unprecedented in galactic history. The human base wasn't just defended by human forces. It was defended by every species the Krillians had ever oppressed. Vorthak crystal ships flew alongside human vessels, their crystalline hulls reflecting and amplifying human energy weapons. Nexari energy beings had somehow learned to interface directly with human computer systems, creating hybrid consciousness machine entities that fought with terrifying efficiency. But most shocking of all were the Krillian ships flying in formation with the human fleet. These weren't captured vessels crewed by humans. They were Krillian civilians who had escaped Imperial territory and voluntarily joined the human liberation forces. The sight of Krillian vessels firing on Imperial forces was perhaps the most psychologically devastating moment of the entire war. It confirmed what many had suspected but none had dared voice. The Empire's own people were so disgusted by their government's actions that they would rather fight alongside aliens than defend their homeworld. The battle was a massacre, but not in the way Emperor Zixmoth had intended. The human-led coalition forces didn't just defeat our conscript fleet, they systematically disabled our ships while broadcasting appeals to surrender directly to individual Krillian soldiers. The humans had somehow learned to speak perfect Krillian, not just the language but the cultural nuances and emotional undertones that made communication truly effective. Their surrender appeals weren't threats or demands. They were invitations to join the growing coalition of free peoples working to build a better galaxy. Entire ships began surrendering without firing a shot. Conscript crews who had been forced into military service at gunpoint discovered that the humans were offering them something the Empire never had: a choice. Within hours, nearly half of the Krillian conscript fleet had defected to the human side. The remaining vessels found themselves outnumbered and outgunned by their own former comrades, led by humans who seemed to understand Krillian psychology better than Krillian commanders did. The humans offered every surviving Imperial vessel the same choice they had given the defectors: join the coalition and help rebuild the galaxy, or return to Krillian space with a message for Emperor Zixmoth. Those who chose to return carried a proposal that would fundamentally alter the structure of galactic civilization. The humans were offering to negotiate a peace treaty, but the terms were non-negotiable: the complete dismantling of the Imperial system, the liberation of all remaining slave worlds, and the establishment of a new galactic order based on voluntary cooperation rather than forced submission. Emperor Zixmoth's response was predictably defiant. He declared that the Krillian species would die before submitting to human authority, and ordered the activation of what he called the final solution: planet killer weapons hidden throughout Krillian space, aimed not at human worlds but at the Empire's own planets. The Emperor's plan was genocidal in its scope. If the Krillian Empire couldn't continue as a galactic power, then the Krillian species would die, taking as much of the galaxy with them as possible. Automated weapon systems would sterilize every world under Imperial control, denying the humans any meaningful victory. The revelation of this plan finally broke the last vestiges of Imperial unity. Krillian military officers who had remained loyal, despite everything, finally understood that their emperor was planning to murder their own families, rather than accept defeat. The military coup that followed was swift and decisive. Admiral Thex Mora, the Empire's most decorated military hero, led a coalition of senior officers in arresting Emperor Zixmoth and seizing control of the Imperial government. Their first act was to contact the human fleet and request immediate assistance in disarming the planet-killer weapons. The humans' response revealed the true scope of their intelligence network. They had known about the hidden weapons for months and had already begun infiltrating the facilities where they were stored. Human Special Forces teams were in position to prevent any genocidal activation, waiting only for official Krillian authorization to proceed. The speed and precision with which the weapons were neutralized demonstrated that the humans had been several steps ahead of Imperial planning for the entire war. They hadn't just been reacting to Krillian moves. They had been anticipating them and preparing countermeasures well in advance. Admiral Thex Mora formally surrendered the Krillian Empire to human authority 3 days later, but the humans refused to accept the surrender. Instead, they proposed something unprecedented in galactic history: the voluntary dissolution of all Imperial governments and their replacement with a confederation of free worlds. The human proposition, as it came to be known, called for the complete reorganization of galactic civilization along principles that no species had ever seriously considered. Instead of empires built on conquest and subjugation, the humans proposed voluntary associations of worlds, united by shared values and mutual benefit. They weren't seeking to become the galaxy's new rulers. They were seeking to eliminate the concept of rulership entirely. Every world would govern itself according to its own values and traditions, with disputes resolved through negotiation and compromise rather than military force. The transition period that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Human fleets didn't occupy former Imperial worlds. They helped establish local governments and provided technical assistance for species learning to govern themselves for the first time in centuries. I was assigned to work with human administrators during the transition, expecting to find conquerors dividing up the spoils of victory. Instead, I found engineers and teachers working frantically to rebuild infrastructure and establish educational systems on worlds that had been deliberately kept ignorant and dependent. The humans approached galactic reconstruction with the same systematic efficiency they had brought to galactic conquest. But instead of destroying existing civilizations, they were building new ones based on principles of cooperation and mutual respect that most species had never experienced. They weren't trying to make us human, they were trying to help us become the best versions of ourselves. And for the first time in my 3 centuries of life, I began to understand what the galaxy could become when fear and hatred were replaced by hope and compassion. The reconstruction period that followed the collapse of the Krillian Empire was perhaps more terrifying to observe than the war itself, though for entirely different reasons. Where the humans had demonstrated their capacity for devastating military efficiency, they now revealed an even more disturbing ability. They could fundamentally transform entire civilizations through patience, compassion, and an inexorable commitment to principles that most galactic species had never seriously considered. I was assigned to the Krylos Reconstruction Commission, working alongside human administrators to establish new governmental structures on former imperial worlds. I expected to find myself subordinated to human authority, serving as a puppet leader for an occupation government. Instead, I found myself part of a collaborative effort that challenged every assumption I held about power and governance. The humans didn't establish military governors or occupation forces in the traditional sense. Instead, they brought teams of what they called transition specialists, experts in economics, sociology, education, and dozens of other fields that the Krillian Empire had never considered relevant to administration. They began by asking questions that no imperial administrator had ever thought to ask. What did the local population actually want? What resources did they need to thrive? What cultural traditions should be preserved and celebrated? What skills would help them build self-sustaining societies? The process was methodical and comprehensive. Human specialists would spend months on individual worlds, learning local languages, studying cultural practices, and working with community leaders to understand the unique needs and aspirations of each population. But the most disturbing aspect of their approach was their complete lack of interest in extracting value from the territories they now controlled. They weren't mining resources, collecting taxes, or demanding tribute. Instead, they were investing massive amounts of time, energy, and materials in building infrastructure that would benefit local populations. Educational facilities were among their highest priorities. On worlds where the imperial government had deliberately kept populations ignorant to maintain control, humans established universities, libraries, and technical training centers. They shared advanced technologies freely, teaching former imperial subjects to repair, operate, and eventually improve upon systems that had previously been reserved for the ruling elite. I witnessed the transformation of Krylos Minor, a world where the imperial government had maintained a population of nearly 1 billion beings in conditions barely above subsistence. Within 2 years of human intervention, the world had developed independent manufacturing capabilities, established its own research institutions, and begun contributing innovations to the galactic community. The speed of these transformations was unprecedented in galactic history. Worlds that had stagnated under imperial rule for centuries were suddenly experiencing technological and social advances that would have taken millennia. Under the old system, the humans seemed to understand something fundamental about intelligent species that the empires had never grasped: beings who are free to pursue their own interests and develop their own capabilities will accomplish far more than those forced to serve the interests of distant rulers. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of human administration was their approach to former imperial personnel. Officers like Zexithara, who had served the empire faithfully for decades, weren't executed, imprisoned, or exiled. Instead, they were offered opportunities to participate in reconstruction efforts. They studied our records, analyzed our decisions, and identified those among us who had demonstrated competence and integrity, even within the corrupt imperial system. Rather than punishing us for our service to tyranny, they sought to redirect our skills toward more constructive purposes. The psychological impact of this approach was profound. Krillian officers who had expected to face war crimes tribunals found themselves working alongside human specialists to solve complex logistical problems and establish efficient governmental structures. The humans seemed more interested in learning from past mistakes than in punishing those who had made them. I found myself working with Dr. Sarah Chen, Admiral Chen's daughter, the same child who had broadcast the ultimatum during the Krylos Prime incident. She had grown into a brilliant sociologist who spoke perfect Krillian and demonstrated an intimate understanding of our cultural psychology. Dr. Chen's team was tasked with developing governmental structures that would be both efficient and compatible with Krillian social traditions. Rather than imposing human-style democracy or maintaining imperial authoritarianism, they were creating hybrid systems that incorporated the best aspects of both approaches. She explained that humans had studied thousands of different governmental systems throughout their own history, learning from the successes and failures of each. They weren't trying to create perfect societies, but rather societies that could evolve and improve over time through peaceful means. The transformation wasn't limited to governmental structures. Human specialists were working to address every aspect of civilization: economic systems, social hierarchies, educational methods, even artistic and cultural expression. They seemed determined to help every species reach its full potential. On Vorthak Prime, human scientists were working with crystalline entities to develop new forms of energy manipulation that combined Vorthak natural abilities with human technological innovation. The resulting hybrid technologies were advancing both species' understanding of fundamental physics. Similar collaborations were occurring throughout former imperial space. Nexari energy beings were working with human computer specialists to develop consciousness-machine interfaces that neither species could have achieved alone. Former slave species were being given access to advanced technologies and educational resources that allowed them to rapidly develop their own unique contributions to galactic civilization. The humans seemed to operate on the principle that diversity of thought and approach was inherently valuable. Rather than trying to homogenize the galaxy according to their own standards, they were encouraging every species to develop their distinctive capabilities to the fullest extent possible. But the most terrifying aspect of human reconstruction efforts was their apparent long-term planning. Everything they did seemed designed not just to solve immediate problems, but to establish foundations for continued growth and development over centuries or millennia. They were building educational systems that would produce scientists and engineers for generations to come. They were establishing economic networks that would create prosperity and stability across multiple star systems. They were developing diplomatic protocols that would prevent future conflicts through cooperation rather than deterrence. The scope of their vision was almost incomprehensible. While most galactic civilizations planned in terms of decades or perhaps centuries, the humans seemed to be thinking in terms of geological timescales. They were building a foundation for a galactic civilization that could endure and evolve for millions of years. Dr. Chen explained that humans had learned through their own history that sustainable civilizations required more than just advanced technology or military power. They required social structures that could adapt to changing circumstances, educational systems that could develop new knowledge, and economic arrangements that created opportunity rather than scarcity. The success of these reconstruction efforts was becoming undeniable. Former imperial worlds were not just recovering from centuries of oppression. They were thriving in ways that had never been possible under the old system. Productivity was increasing, innovation was accelerating, and quality of life was improving at rates that defied traditional economic models. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation came when I asked Dr. Chen about the ultimate human objective. What did they hope to achieve through all these reconstruction efforts? What was their endgame? Her answer challenged every assumption about power and ambition that had dominated galactic civilization for millennia. The humans weren't seeking to build an empire or establish themselves as the galaxy's permanent rulers. They were working to create a civilization that could eventually transcend the need for rulers entirely. She told me that humans had concluded that the greatest threat to any civilization was stagnation, the tendency for successful societies to become rigid and unable to adapt to new challenges. Their goal was to create a galactic community that could continue evolving and improving indefinitely, without requiring external intervention or control. The implications were staggering. If the humans succeeded in their reconstruction efforts, they would have created something unprecedented in galactic history, a truly free and self-governing interstellar civilization capable of unlimited growth and development. And they were doing it not through conquest or domination, but through education, cooperation, and an unwavering commitment to the potential of every sentient being. As I record this final testimony 50 years after first encountering humanity, I find myself struggling to convey the magnitude of the transformation they have wrought upon galactic civilization. The galaxy I knew as a young officer, a place of empires and subjugation, of endless cycles of conquest and rebellion, no longer exists. In its place stands something unprecedented in the history of intelligent life, a true community of free worlds united not by force, but by choice. The Galactic Confederation that emerged from the ashes of the old imperial system defies every principle of political science that governed interstellar relations for millennia. No single species dominates the others. No military force maintains order through fear. and no central authority dictates policy to member worlds. Instead, the humans have helped create a network of independent civilizations linked by voluntary cooperation, shared knowledge, and mutual benefit. Disputes that once would have triggered devastating wars are now resolved through mediation, negotiation, and collaborative problem-solving. The economic transformation has been equally remarkable. The old system of resource extraction and tribute has been replaced by networks of voluntary exchange that create prosperity for all participants. Worlds that were once impoverished under imperial rule now contribute unique innovations to a galactic marketplace of ideas and technologies. The speed of technological advancement under this new system has been breathtaking. When different species are free to contribute their distinctive capabilities to collaborative research efforts, the resulting innovations surpass anything that any single civilization could have achieved alone. Forthak crystal growing techniques combined with human manufacturing methods have revolutionized construction technology. Nexari consciousness transfer abilities integrated with human computer systems have created artificial intelligences that can solve problems beyond the capacity of any biological mind. Even Krillian organizational skills once used to maintain oppressive hierarchies have been redirected toward managing vast cooperative projects that benefit entire star systems. But perhaps the most profound change has been in the realm of military affairs. The human approach to conflict resolution has made traditional warfare almost obsolete throughout the Confederation. Military forces still exist, but their primary function is no longer conquest or deterrence, it's exploration and disaster relief. Human-led expedition fleets venture beyond Confederation space to make contact with new species, always with the goal of invitation rather than conquest. When they encounter civilizations still trapped in cycles of imperial oppression, they offer the same choice they once gave the Krillian Empire. Join the Confederation voluntarily or remain isolated until ready to embrace cooperative principles. The psychological impact of this approach has been extraordinary. Species that have known only domination and subjugation throughout their history are suddenly presented with genuine alternatives. The transformation that follows is typically swift and comprehensive, as populations discover the possibilities that emerge when fear is replaced by hope. I have personally witnessed the conversion of 17 different imperial systems to Confederation membership over the past 5 decades. In every case, the process follows the same pattern: initial resistance from ruling elites, gradual acceptance by general populations, and eventual enthusiastic embrace of cooperative principles by the entire civilization. The humans have also solved the fundamental problem that plagued all previous galactic civilizations: the tendency for successful societies to become corrupt and stagnant over time. They have done this through what they call institutional evolution, the deliberate design of social systems that become more effective and responsive as they mature. Educational institutions throughout the Confederation are constantly developing new methods and expanding their curricula. Governmental structures regularly modify themselves based on citizen feedback and changing circumstances. Economic systems adapt to new technologies and opportunities without requiring central planning or control. This capacity for peaceful, voluntary change has eliminated the boom and bust cycles that characterized previous galactic civilizations. Instead of growing until they become unsustainable and then collapsing catastrophically, Confederation societies continue improving indefinitely through gradual, adaptive modifications. But the most remarkable aspect of human influence has been their gradual withdrawal from active leadership roles. As other species have developed the skills and institutions necessary for self-governance, humans have systematically transferred responsibility and authority to local populations. Today, human administrators are relatively rare in Confederation space. Most worlds are governed entirely by their own populations, with humans serving only as advisors or technical specialists when specifically requested. The species that once conquered the galaxy through overwhelming military force has chosen to step back and allow others to shape their own destinies. This voluntary abdication of power is perhaps the most terrifying demonstration of human capability I have witnessed. Any species can conquer through superior force, but only beings of extraordinary wisdom and restraint can build a lasting civilization and then trust others to maintain it. The current generation of Confederation leaders, beings who grew up in the post-imperial era, barely understand how radically different their reality is from what preceded it. They take for granted freedoms and opportunities that previous generations could never have imagined. Young Krillians today pursue careers in scientific research, artistic expression, or diplomatic service with other species. They collaborate on projects that span multiple star systems and make decisions based on their own interests and aspirations, rather than imperial directives. The idea that their ancestors once lived as subjects of an authoritarian empire seems as foreign to them as their current freedom once seemed to me. The humans have achieved something that philosophers throughout galactic history dismissed as impossible. They have broken the cycle of empire and rebellion that trapped intelligent species in endless repetitions of conquest and liberation. They have created a stable, prosperous, and genuinely free interstellar civilization. As I prepare to conclude this testimony, I am often asked whether I believe the Confederation will endure. Will this unprecedented experiment in galactic cooperation survive the challenges that destroyed every previous civilization? My answer is that the humans have addressed the fundamental causes of civilizational collapse through the simple expedient of making the Confederation more valuable to its members than any alternative. No species has any incentive to rebel against a system that maximizes their freedom and prosperity, while providing them with opportunities for growth and development that they could never achieve in isolation. The Confederation doesn't maintain itself through military force or central authority. It maintains itself through the voluntary choice of billions of intelligent beings who have discovered that cooperation produces better results than competition, that diversity generates more innovation than conformity, and that freedom creates more prosperity than control. The humans have given the galaxy something unprecedented in the history of intelligent life, a glimpse of what civilization can become when beings choose to build rather than destroy, to cooperate rather than dominate, and to trust rather than fear. They have shown us that the ultimate victory in war is not the defeat of enemies, but the transformation of enemies into friends. In closing, I must address the question that has haunted me throughout these decades of testimony. Are humans truly the terrifying military force I once believed them to be? The answer is both yes and no. Yes, humans possess military capabilities that surpass anything previously seen in galactic civilization. Their capacity for strategic thinking, technological innovation, and coordinated action makes them nearly unstoppable when they choose to fight. But their true terror lies not in their ability to destroy, but in their ability to create something better than what existed before. They are terrifying because they represent the possibility that intelligent beings can transcend the limitations that have constrained galactic civilization throughout history. They prove that warfare, oppression, and scarcity are choices rather than inevitable consequences of intelligent life. The galaxy the humans have helped create is not perfect. No civilization could be. But it is something far more valuable than perfection. It is a civilization capable of continuous improvement through peaceful means. It is a community of free beings working together to build a future limited only by their imagination and determination. And perhaps that is the most terrifying thing of all, the knowledge that this was always possible, that every atrocity committed in the name of empire and every life lost to imperial ambition was unnecessary. The humans have shown us that we could have chosen cooperation over conquest at any point in our history. We simply lacked the courage and wisdom to try. This concludes my testimony to the Galactic War Crimes Tribunal. I pray that future generations will learn from our mistakes and continue building upon the foundation that humanity has given us. A foundation of freedom, cooperation, and unlimited possibility that could endure for as long as intelligent life exists in this galaxy.